Well, thank you very much, Martin, for agreeing to talk to us today. We know you're incredibly busy, and so we're really, really grateful that you've taken the time to answer questions here today.
No, of course, it's great to be with you again, at least televisually, and it's a really important part of the role to try and stay engaged and communicating in both directions with the participants of the scheme. So delighted to do it.
Thank you. Well, when we went out to the Every Australian Counts community and said that we were talking to you today and what questions would people like us to ask you, we got flooded with questions. We literally got hundreds of questions, so many more than we could have time to deal with today. So we've tried to pick the questions that were most common, that were most representative, the things that people asked us to ask you. So I'm going to start first with probably the most common question that we've been asked in the last little while. And the question that I've got comes from both Jade and Kylie. And they have both asked, what exactly are the new guidelines for iPads and laptops so we can access therapy and support? There's been a lot of confusion.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it is an important question to ask. And there has been some confusion, and that was our fault, and I'm always upfront about saying that. We got a little bit ahead of ourselves at the end of last week, and we're working furiously to address that now. So right now, the position is as it's always been. We know funding is for disability-related needs. Laptops and iPads, other tech are generally seen as everyday things that are used broadly by all people. However, we do absolutely recognise that where we've got this big change in the way the whole of society works, and much therapy and much social engagement is being rapidly transformed, and we're seeing some great stories by providers changing and innovating in the way services are provided. We do recognise the need to think again about the way this works. Now, of course, many people have devices, and of course we're seeing programs that the states and state education departments are rolling out for devices as well. And so we do need to think about how this works together with those programs and works in an equitable way. Let me just say, we've been working through this literally every day since Easter. And we're very close, and I would expect next week to be able to say something new.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Martin. This next question comes from Nigel, and Nigel says, why haven't you increased plans to cover the new 10% price increase? This comes on top of not increasing plans to cover the TTP loading on prices. I have estimated that I am now down about 5 hours per week in core support because of this price increase. Now I will have to seek a review, and I've just finished one. We need a more streamlined approach.
So obviously in Nigel's particular circumstances, I don't know the details of his plan, and I would, and if he personally, but it would sound like he must be very close to his total budget spend if in order to accommodate this he needs to drop hours, and that is not the intent. And we do have a new streamlined approach for COVID-19 related plan adjustments. Call the call centre, press 5. There's a dedicated team making adjustments for just this sort of circumstance. But look, the general situation is this, that on average, the great majority of plans run at a utilisation rate well below 100%. So there is the capacity to cover this temporary, we hope and intend temporary, 10% on certain line items for 6 months. And where there is not, in what should be a very small number of cases, and maybe Nigel is one of them, but in this very small number of cases, we do have the streamlined approach to get the plan amended and topped up. But for the overwhelming majority of people, that won't be the case, because utilisation rates are in the 60 and 70%, and there is capacity there.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Martin. The next question that we've got is from Michelle. And Michelle asks, why have you changed the cancellation policy? We now have to give 10 days notice to cancel a service. This seems excessive. It's not like we can plan being sick.
No, and again, this is a really tricky one, and I really respect Michelle's position there. It's strange because I get criticised as well from providers who say you haven't changed the cancellation policy enough, and we should require a month's notice, or we should be able to keep charging regardless of cancellation or not for the whole of the COVID-19 6-month period, etc. So sort of taking it from both sides in that respect. And we quite genuinely were trying to seek a balance that where we were expecting to see an increased number of cancellations for across the board, whether the person was sick or just was practicing physical distancing and not wanting to attend. We just needed to give a little bit more time for the providers to adjust to that fact, and hence the change to 10 days. This is one of the things that we've done for a 3 and 6 month period, subject to review and subject to the cancellation policy, subject to the COVID situation in general. So it's not intended to be a permanent change in arrangements.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Anne. And lots of people ask this question, but we just picked the one from Anne. When will people be able to move their NDIS funds around? For example, when will we be able to move funds from core into capacity building? Why can't we just move funds between categories?
Yeah, and certainly it is the intention of the agency, and I've spoken about this with you and others before, to move in the direction of greater flexibility, greater treating of the funding package or funding plan as a total. There's a range of things that have got to do with that, including education and support and controls, etc., to put that sort of in place. Right now, we do have that flexibility. We've seen for support coordination, the ability to use that between core and capacity building. For the great majority of cases, there is flexibility within the core component and the different line items there. And again, we encourage people to use the 1-800 number, press 5 for the COVID special teams, to make that streamlined sort of plan adjustments to move money around and use it in different ways, including through that streamlined approach between capacity and core, as Anne was asking. Okay,
so the message is, if you want to move money around, call the call centre.
Yeah, exactly. And we've had that line there, and we've been trying to promote it, and this session is part of that, and in all our comms, etc. I think it's a good thing, but we haven't had that many calls to it. So I think that means that sort of people are coping, or maybe it was just that people were sort of working out what they needed to do in this new world and sort of thinking it through, and now they'll be ready to start thinking about how to best use their plan at this time. And that's what we want people to be able to do.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. This next question we got asked by a lot of people, and we chose 2 questions from Contessa and from Dawn, and we've kind of smushed them together and combined them. So the question is, how much support and personal care is it reasonable for the NDIS to expect families to provide? How many hours of work is considered reasonable? Why is the term parental responsibility so ambiguous? It seems to vary from planner to planner to LAC to LAC. what we do goes way beyond ordinary parental responsibility?
Sure, and this is a really important and difficult question. And let me just start by just acknowledging my respect, admiration for so many parents, so many families in what they do with children with disabilities. And I absolutely know that people go well above and beyond what another family might do. Absolutely. And nothing that I want to do or the agency wants to do should in any way sort of either on one hand disrespect that, or on the other hand sort of take it for granted or take advantage of it. The Act is clear in one sense, in that it absolutely says that when it comes to funded supports and the consideration of what is reasonable and necessary, I must, as CEO and then delegated through the organisation, take into account what is reasonable to expect families, carers, informal networks and the community generally to provide. And there's that word reasonable. And the question that Contessa and the other person asks is, well, what is reasonable? And of course, the only answer is it depends on the circumstances. And that's one of the great tensions that's at the heart of the NDIS scheme, which is, on the one hand, we don't want a black letter set of rules and laws that says, well, you look it up and it says, this is what you get, full stop. That's what the law says, no more, no less. The whole scheme was trying to be about, and it's right up front in the Act, individualized situation, taking into account goals and objectives of the person, taking into account their particular circumstances, and trying to be reasonable in those circumstances. And I absolutely acknowledge that that is hard because it's about individualization at mass scale all the way across the country. So I'm quite sure that the questioners are right, that there is difference between planners and difference between LACs. Some of that is because the people are different, the situation is different, and what is reasonable in those circumstances for one family and one parent will be different from another parent. And that's why we get a large part of the variation that we see on these sorts of matters. So there isn't a simple answer to this question at all. I would say one place we start with is, well, what does a parent of a child without disability reasonably do? And responsibility for transport for your children rests with families, rests with parents in large degree. And so that translates across to a child with disability and the expectations on transport with their parents, just as it does for parents of children without disabilities. So we start from that place of what do parents generally do for children, regardless of whether they do or don't have a disability, and work from there in the circumstances. And then the capability of the parents and the wider family and the wider community has to come into it as well. So look, I don't want to keep going on and on because it's difficult to give a precise answer, but we're very aware of it. We do want to, in general, try and improve, not just in this question, but in all these areas of reasonableness and decision making, try and have more, and I've spoken about this before, including a few and others, we do think we can do a better job at having more public guidelines, examples, case studies as to how things should be decided. People might not like what those guidelines say in all cases, of course, but at least they will be there as indication of what should be expected. And that's really what I can say on that. I just want to come back again and just emphasize, my complete personal, respect and admiration for what parents and families do in the situation of a child with disability.
And that it's even more difficult right at this particular time, which is, I'm sure, why, you know, all of the people who sent us this question wanted it brought up.
Correct. Yeah.
So the next question that we have is from Michelle. And Michelle asks, one recent announcement said that the NDIS is contacting around 62,000 high-risk participants to make sure they're getting the supports they need during this crisis. I'm in that high-risk group and I haven't had any contact with anyone. What is being done for those who are at high risk of COVID-19?
Sure. So first thing I'd say is that if any participant or their family is concerned about exposure to coronavirus, then they absolutely needing to be calling the Department of Health line, 1-800-020-080, or the National Relay Service, if they need to use that, 1300-555-727. What we're doing in the agency, in addition, is as well as our own call centre number and the dial 5 for the COVID-19 hotline and the special teams there, is as well as that sort of being better at receiving, we're trying to be proactive as well. So we have started a program of direct contact calls to what will get to about 60,000 people based on the criteria of their high risk, the nature of the disability, what supports they're receiving, their health status, their accommodation status, factors like that. So we've started to make those calls in the last week. We're ramping up the numbers. We hope to get in the next week or so to about 2,000 calls per day. And so far they've been going very well, and people have been very grateful just for the call and the contact in itself. And there is a big value in just in that checking in, you know, we're here, hello, etc. But we can talk about plan issues, and so the need for any light touch adjustments, as we've spoken about before, making sure things like they've got their Woolworths code or their grocery code. I shouldn't name one grocery store, but you know, the grocery code, and they know how that's working if they're after that. But I would just urge, if you need contact, obviously don't wait for us to get through our list. Please just call the contact centre. You know, at the moment we're handling the call volumes really well. We've got the dedicated teams there. The numbers have not been huge to date, so you will get through, and you know, the teams are keen to try and assist.
Great, thank you. All right, the next question that we've got is from Emma. And Emma asks, for people who've had to reduce support hours because of the coronavirus, can we be reassured that future plans won't be cut because funds weren't used? So
yes, Emma can definitely be reassured that future plans won't be cut because funds were unspent for whatever reason, but particularly for the impacts of COVID-19 and the quite rational and reasonable decisions or necessary decisions that a participant may have made in terms of use of their plan. Plans will be adjusted based on, you know, the changes of circumstances, changes of need, changes in the nature and extent of disability, etc. They're not made on the basis of spent or unspent funds in the prior plan, and that's absolutely the case for the COVID-19 situation.
Right. Well, that will be good, because we got that question from a lot of people. So that will be reassurance, not just for Emma, but for lots of people. And we're going to give the last question to Shirley. And Shirley asks, why does the information on the NDIS coronavirus pages give a flat out no to employing family members when the NDIS operational guidelines allow it under exceptional circumstances? Could you set up a hotline so these requests could be dealt with urgently?
So, as I've said, we do have the hotline, but I do have to say that, yes, in exceptional circumstances, that is allowed for. But that is really talking about a situation where it's advice on the advice of health professionals, where there is just no other option at all available. And for the safety of the participant, we have agreed in a very small number of cases for a family member to receive paid daily care supports. But that is not the general policy, even in the COVID-19 situation. And so that's not really a factor that goes into the exceptional circumstances consideration. We do believe that it is important, as I referred to earlier in the questions under the Act, to take into account the very real responsibility, and I'm not disparaging those or taking advantage of those, but just the real responsibilities that do exist in our society for parents and family members, for children and other family members.
Mm. Well, as I said, that was the last question from Shirley.
Sure.
We're incredibly grateful, Martin, that you took the time to talk with us here today and answer questions from people who are in the Every Australian Counts community. You can probably imagine there's a lot of anxiety and stress and fear in the community, and it's great that you took the time to answer people's questions and help people get through that. So we're really grateful. Thank you.
No, it's always a pleasure, and it's easy to do, particularly just on Zoom, etc. So I'm very happy to do it again in future. I hope my answers have been sort of helpful and positive and straightforward as to where things are and are not. And you're right, there is uncertainty, anxiety, fear in the whole community, obviously in the NDIS community, but in the whole community. But we should be reassured that Australia is doing very, very well, and certainly when it comes to concerns about healthcare, we are in a strong position now where the number of people who are in intensive care is numbered in the tens, and the number of intensive care beds we have is numbered in the thousands. So we're in good shape, and people with disability who might be fearful of that situation should be reassured by that situation that it is being managed well. The health system is working incredibly hard, and we're supporting in our small way to move people out of hospital who have a disability, may have been there for a while, and find alternate accommodation so that hospital beds can be freed up. It's just one example of the work that's being done across the board to prepare our health system. So to the extent that that reassures people, they should take away that the health system is in good shape at this stage to cope with what might come, and we hope it doesn't, of course, but what might come, including and especially for people with disability.
Yeah, and certainly the people that I talk to, they're all doing their bit by staying home. So
exactly.
So yeah, so again, we're grateful that you made the time to be here. Thanks.
We'll speak soon. Bye now.
Thank you.